Good day, everyone. Welcome to the third lecture in our series for the Philippine Intercollegiate Debate Championship. My name is Stephen Paul C. Shawan, but most of my students fondly call me Sir Shawi. Today, we'll be talking about a topic that is very close to my heart, education. And I primarily chose this topic not just because I'm a teacher by profession, but because I truly believe in the power of education to shape individuals, communities, and the nation as a whole. I currently teach at Xavier University Senior High School, where I handle subjects such as oral communication, media and information literacy, and reading and writing. But beyond my classroom experience and expertise, I chose to speak on Philippine education and its development for three key nuanced reasons. I think, firstly, in terms of debate, I think education is often overlooked in debates. If you look at past trends, education-themed motions are usually treated as warm up or soft rounds. However, I believe this topic is rich with nuance and relevance. There's so much we can unpack both in this lecture and throughout the ADC. But secondarily, I think education, it shapes how we think, act, and engage with the world. Understanding education in our local context helps us make sense of broader societal issues and challenges. Thirdly and lastly, I think there are also pressing educational issues in the Philippines today, from the rollout of the new curriculum, for example, to the ongoing educational crisis and challenges within the Department of Education. I believe these are timely and important topics that deserve deeper analysis and critical thought. So with that being said, I think let's go directly to the main discussion itself. My lecture is compartmentalized into three major parts. Firstly, on tracing the chalk lines of Philippine education history. This is a brief retrospective discussion of how we progress as a nation in the fields of education. Secondly, in terms of curriculum reimagined, what's the new curriculum? This is the bulk of my discussion insofar as we need to talk about and unpack what is the current context of our educational system. Third and lastly, educational crisis in the Philippines, hoax or harsh reality. This is where we learn if is it truly true that we have educational crisis and what are the current problems you are currently experiencing as a nation in the field of education. So now let us start on the history of Philippine education. This is going to be short and sweet. Let's do it in timeline. Firstly, let's talk about the pre-colonial period before 1521. If we take a look at the pre-colonial period, the educational system was informal, unstructured, and community-based. Learning was transmitted orally. It focuses more on vocational skills, social roles, and cultural traditions. Fathers, for example, fathers taught their sons hunting and fishing, while mothers instructed their daughters in household management. This means that, contrary to the colonial prejudice that the pre-colonial Filipinos were uncivilized and illiterate, the reality is that there are complex systems of knowledge and governments already existed long before the Spanish arrival. Let's say, for example, Babaylans, the spiritual leaders, and Datus community chiefs served as educators and moral guides, showcasing a structured socio-political and educational system. For example, the Ifugao, the transmission of the rice terracing knowledge is taught from generation to generation through observation and participation. Or secondly, the Tagbanao or Tagbanwa and Mangyan people use their own scripts, Surat Tagbanwa and Surat Mangyan, to record oral tradition which challenges the myth of pre-colonial illiteracy. These examples reveal that education in pre-colonial Philippines was holistic and adapted to the people's environment, culture, and belief system. It is important to recognize that while it did not follow the Western model of formal schooling, it was an effective and sophisticated form of education tailored to sustain their communities. After we have Spanish period from 1521 to 1898, the Spanish colonizers introduced formal education primarily to propagate Christianity. Religious orders established schools teaching catechism, reading, writing, and arithmetic. If you take a look, it is characterized where schools were mostly established in urban centers near churches or convents, which became centers of learning. These were largely in lowland areas where Spanish influence was strongest. Remote and upland areas were generally neglected educationally. This is actually still reflected in our society today, where centralization around urban centers, where educational development remains centered in lowland urban areas with rural and indigenous communities often underserved. Secondly, in terms of accessibility of education, the educational what do you call this? The Education Decree of 1863 by Queen Isabella II, I think, of Spain required the establishment of at least one primary school for boys and girls in every town. So this was a landmark step toward mass education. However, higher education was exclusive and typically only for ilustrado or the elite class before, with institutions like Ateneo Municipal and University of Santo Tomas serving wealthy males, for example. This is still manifested in our society today, where religious influence persists. Catholic private schools still play a dominant role in Philippine education, such as Ateneo, UST, LaSalle, for example. Thirdly, in terms of the educational principles, or in terms of the educational principles back then in Spanish colonial rule, there is a clear and explicit religious doctrine and colonial assimilation. This means that the system was heavily religious, hierarchical, and meant to produce loyal and colonial subjects rather than critical thinkers. So this is still felt today, where the legacy of elitist education persists in the form of tuition-heavy private schools that serve higher income students. So this means that despite centuries having passed since Spanish colonial period, structural remnants of that era are still deeply embedded in the Philippine education system, from urban centralization and religious dominance to elitist access and educational inequities, for example. The past continues to shape the present in ways that demand critical reflection and reform. Thirdly, now let's proceed to the American period. The Americans restructured the education system to promote democratic ideals and the English language. I think the notable historical significance of it is that the Education Act of 1901 established a centralized public school system, and American teachers known as Thomasites were deployed. The curriculum emphasized English proficiency more, science, mathematics, and vocational training. So just to elaborate, in 1901, around 600 American teachers known as Thomasites arrived abroad and aboard the USS Thomas to train local teachers and teach subjects in English. Over time, Filipino teachers were trained and hired under civil service system, so democratizing the teaching profession. And during this time as well, schools were built nationwide, including rural areas under public school system that was more inclusive. And at the same time, the Americans prioritized the construction of what we call this, Gabaldon type school buildings, standardized schoolhouses. That's what they called it before. And if you take a look, the current context, the public school network established by the Americans laid the groundwork for today's Department of Education managed system. But many of those buildings and frameworks are now outdated. Now, in terms of its principle, it was more on pragmatism and democracy and industrialization. And in terms of the tool, education was a tool to civilize and Americanize Filipinos, as well as to prepare them for industrial work and civic participation. Now, if we take a look the current implication of it, there are three important implications in the current context, how this shapes our society today. If we take a look, firstly, English remains the official medium in many subjects. This has both advantages in terms of global competitiveness and disadvantages such as cognitive load for early learners. Secondly, I think the implication as well is that the American emphasizes on testing influence the current assessment system such as NAT, PISA, the participation of majority of the public schools we have today. But thirdly, I think teaching became a formalized profession, but low compensation and resource limitations still affect teacher morale and performance. Now, let's proceed to the um, when we talk about the Japanese occupation, the education focused on promoting Filipino culture and the Japanese language. The curriculum aimed to foster Asian values and diminish Western influence during this time. If you take a look, the Japanese occupation was characterized of three things. Firstly, many schools in urban centers were damaged or closed due to war during that time. The Japanese reopened some school and established Nihongo, the Japanese language classes in makeshift classrooms or existing facilities already. But secondarily, if we take a look as well, there was also an emphasis placed on teaching the Nihongo language. Filipino history and values, vocational skills, and anti-Western sentiments was in a great premium during that time, wherein education promoted greater East Asia co-prosperity narrative and sought to instill obedience, simplicity, and anti-colonial nationalism, but under Japanese influence. Now, if we take a look the current implications, there are two significant nuances in our society today. I think the first thing that we have to note is that the Japanese strategy to reduce Western dependence sparked early nationalistic sentiments, later seen in post-war curricula emphasizing Filipino identity and history. Basically, this is the benchmark. Secondarily, there is a growing movement to decolonize education. The decolonization narrative started there, pushing for more content rooted in local history and indigenous knowledge system. Last but not the least, the current period we have right now, the post-independence period, 1946 present, the Philippines developed an education system reflecting nationalistic and democratic ideals. Keynote for here is that reforms included the establishment of the Department of Education and the implementation of various curricula to address evolving societal needs of the Filipino people. So there are three important keynotes we need to learn. I think firstly, public schools were increasingly built in rural and urban areas already. However, resource allocation remained uneven and unequitable, with urban centers like Metro Manila having better facilities than remote provinces, for example. So teachers are now state certified professionals, most trained through state colleges and universities. One of the key examples here is normal schools like Philippine Normal University. The teacher workforce has expanded significantly but continues to struggle with low pay, training gaps, and research shortages. Now, in terms of the curriculum and system rationale, over time, curriculum reforms have been introduced, including the 1973 Revised Education Program, the 1987 Beck Basic Education Curriculum, and now it transformed to the K-12 curriculum and the new Matatag curriculum in 2024, wherein the aim for this curriculum is to create citizens and students for nation building, globalization, and lifelong learning. And lastly, educational principles. In terms of the educational principles during our time, this is where it heightens the nationalism, democratization, and modernization were explicitly manifested, wherein education is viewed as a right and a vehicle for equity, civic responsibility, and socioeconomic mobility. Now, so in a nutshell, if we take a look, these are the rationale for systemic shifts. So shifts in educational system were responses to, for example, colonial objectives to control and assimilate the population. Next up is for nation building, post-independence efforts to foster national identity, and globalization aligning with international standards and competitiveness. Now that we have finished discussing the history of Philippine education, I think it is important to move forward and examine the present developments. In the next part of the lecture, we will explore the new curriculum, specifically the shift from the K-12 curriculum to the Matatag curriculum. Before diving into the key features, challenges, and progress of this new curriculum or the Matatag curriculum, I think let us first contextualize the reasons behind this sudden transition. Why was there a need for change? What prompted the Department of Education to implement such a shift? And understanding the rationale behind this change will help us appreciate its goals and implication more deeply at the same time for matter loading as well. So if we take a look, the rationale for shifting is basically compartmentalized into four. If you take a look, the first one is the overload content. The K-12 curriculum though comprehensive, was too content heavy for the time available in the classroom. Learners and teachers were pressured to cover more topics than they could deeply understand. For example, in grade 1, Araling Panlipunan, learners were previously expected to memorize the list of Philippine presidents and national symbols without conceptual clarity. Now, in contrast, I will expound that further later on. The Matatag curriculum simplifies these by focusing instead on understanding roles and responsibilities in family and community setting. Now, the key implication to this is that Matatag reduces subject areas in early grades. I will explain that more later on. More on AP and MAPE are removed in grade 1 and 2, focusing on foundational literacy, numeracy, and values formation instead. Now, the second reason is that there is a clear misaligned learning competencies. So, according to DepEd, studies revealed that many competencies were redundant, poorly sequenced, or inappropriate for learners' developmental stage. There was often a mismatch between what was taught, what was tested, and what was expected at each grade level. For example, learners in grade 3 science were being introduced to complex terminologies in physical science before foundational reading skills were even solidified. So the Matatag intervention, the new curriculum uses learning progression standards, and there it is to ensure the topics build logically across grade levels. It is also aligned with PPST, that's what we call Philippine Professional Standards for Teachers. The third, there is a clear inequities in educational access and quality. So, despite universal basic education policies here in the Philippines, students in rural and disadvantaged areas still face significant gaps in terms of teacher quality, access to materials, internet, most specifically, and school infrastructure. So, I think one notable example here in Mindanao, in remote areas like Barm, Samar, and the Cordilleras, for example, students are unable to cover some content as those in Metro Manila or in urban areas, for example, due to lack of textbooks, multilingual support, and trained teachers. So, that is why now DepEd, in terms of teacher support, DepEd has also announced that that there are new training modules, lesson exemplars, and there are also streamlined MELCs. If you take a look, what is MELCs? MELCs means most essential learning competencies. These are significant competencies that the student should learn, and it will be rolled out with the new curriculum. So, the fourth and last reason is that there is a clear imbalances in cognitive demands. The previous curriculum focused heavily on memorization rather than critical thinking, problem solving, and application. Learners often completed school with limited real-world competencies. So I think one of the key studies that we have to note is on a study by the World Bank 2021 that it revealed that 9 out of 10 Filipino students age 10 cannot read and comprehend age-appropriate text. I think clear to nung nag-internship ako sa public school because there are a lot of non-readers already in these schools, and that is very alarming. Later on, we'll talk about how Matatag solve these kinds of issues. So by grades 11 and 12, learners are now being prepared for entrepreneurship, tech vocational careers, and civic involvement. I will elaborate that further later on, how Matatag tried to mitigate these problems on the get-go. Now, we also need to understand that what are the current changes? So as I previously mentioned, the Matatag curriculum introduces several changes. So while it would be quite lengthy to go through every single adjustment in detail, I think it is important to note that there are 4 major changes that serve as a foundation of this curriculum reform. These key changes reflect the Department of Education's response to long-standing issues in the basic education system, and they are intended to improve the quality, relevance, and effectiveness of learning for Filipino students. So the first is that there is an emphasis on foundational skills in terms of literacy, numeracy, and social emotional learning. So if you take a look, the Matatag prioritizes the development of essential lifelong learning skills, especially in the early grades K3. This is in response to national studies and international assessment like PISA and World Bank reports, showing that many Filipinos learners struggle with basic competencies in terms of literacy, again, numeracy, and socio-emotional learning. So if you take a look at the implication to this, this ensures that before students encounter more complex subjects like history or chemistry, biology, complex English grammar, they already possess reading fluency and number sense. It helps them to reduce academic failure and dropouts in later grades. The second notable change as well is the integration of values education and good manners, GMRC. They brought this back. So the Matatag curriculum revives GMRC, or the Good Manners and Right Conduct, and aligns it with Education sa Pagpapakatao, or ESP. I think you can still remember this during your junior high school years, and also for our high school debaters, to foster ethical and moral civic responsibility. So if you take a look, one of the examples here is that in grade 3, learners are guided through role-playing activities to demonstrate respect, honesty, and kindness. This is what you call real-life experiences that they should apply in a day-to-day basis. So in grade 6, also, learners participate in community clean-up projects or simulate barangay assemblies to promote civic involvement. So the key implication to this is that by embedding values early, Matatag aims to produce not only academically competent but also socially responsible citizens. This is a key response to concern about youth behavior, discipline, and societal participation. That is also very important to note is the reduction of core subjects to streamline learning. So a major reform in Matatag is the streamlining of subjects in the early grades to decrease cognitive overload, allowing students and teachers to focus on core developmental skill. So in terms of the structural change, one of the key examples here is that in grades 1 and 2, Araling Panlipunan and MAPE are removed. So these are reintroduced in grade 3 onward when students are developmentally more prepared. So examples here are, for example, in grade 2, they are focused on reading and writing, reading and language, mathematics, edukasyon sa pagpapakatao, the MTB-MLE, or the mother tongue multilingual education. So the implication to this into the new curriculum is that the congestion allows learners to master fewer but more essential skills, reducing burnout and confusion. For teachers, for example, it creates more time for remediation, differentiated instruction, what more, and also meaningful engagement with each subject as opposed to a more like very, very congested subject matter. And in terms of the implementation, the phase implementation starting in school year 2024-2025. So the Matatag curriculum is not being rolled out all at once. This is to ensure, that's why in terms of timeline, it is not immediately implemented. To ensure proper resource deployment, um, teacher training and evaluation, DepEd has chosen a phased implementation strategy. So just a quick in a nutshell, basically, the rollout plan was in school year 2024-2025, the initial rollout in grades K, 1, 4, and 7 in select public schools nationwide. In school year 2025 and 2026, I think there is a gradual inclusion of remaining grade levels in private schools, like teacher training, curriculum materials, and learning resource are developed in parallel. So the implication to this is that the Department of Education as well is data-driven. They are very cautious and data-driven rollouts. And they are very data-driven and cautious in the implementation in order to smoothly transition to the new curriculum. So there are monitor results. There are also adjust implementation strategies. There are also they also want to implement more teacher support and build learning resource progressively. So if we take a look now in a nutshell, in grade levels and its changes, in grades 1 to 3, reduced number of subjects focus on foundational skills, literacy, numeracy. Grades 4 to 6, subjects reintroduced in a spiral integrated approach. And grade 7 to 10, if you take a look, introduction of disciplinary approach, redefine key learning areas, and in senior high school, refinement senior high school tracks with clearer linkages to labor market and college preparation. But there is also a not so fun fact, because I'm a senior high school graduate, and personally, I believe that it's kind of, this is just my personal opinion, this is kind of unfair on my end, because I think it is already a general knowledge that we have a new DepEd secretary. The Department of Education is currently revising the senior high school curriculum under the Matatag initiative. I think one notable proposal is the consolidation of the existing strands into two primary tracks: academic and technical vocational livelihood. So in a nutshell, before there are UMS, ABMs, STEM, GAS, and TVL. Now there are only two strands that will be implemented. According to them, this aims to simplify the curriculum and provide schools with greater flexibility in tailoring their programs to students' needs. Additionally, as well, there is also an ongoing changes. I think there is a legislative proposal that seeks to allow exceptional grade 10 students to bypass senior high school and proceed directly to college or university. So under this bill, students who pass an honors exam would be eligible for early admission to higher education institution as opposed to going to senior high school for 2 years. So according to them, this initiative aims to provide accelerated educational pathways for high achieving students. So yeah. So now, let's delve into the pressing issue, the current educational crisis in the Philippines. Is this crisis real? What do the latest data reveal? Before we explore to the statistics, it's essential to understand what constitutes an educational crisis. Is there really an educational crisis in the Philippines? I think generally, there are three main standards when we consider that there is an educational crisis. These are the indicators of an educational crisis. The first one is students fail to meet basic proficiency levels. This means that learners are unable to demonstrate essential skills in reading, writing, math, or science appropriate for their grade level. Secondly, there is a significant decline in international assessment rankings. This means and this indicates that students are performing poorly compared to their peers globally, reflecting weaknesses and the quality of education that they partake. And lastly, educational outcomes do not align with labor markets. This means that the graduates lack the skills and competencies required by employers, resulting in high unemployment or underemployment. Visualize the frame. When do we constitute an educational crisis? One, the current problems in the Philippine education system we have right now is that there is a clear low proficiency levels in foundational skills. Secondly, learning losses due to disruptions. And thirdly, underfunding of the educational sector. So, in terms of low proficiency levels in foundational skills, so according to the World Bank 2022 and DepEd's National Learning Recovery Plan, only 1 out of 5 Filipino learners meet the minimum proficiency level in reading and mathematics, particularly in grades 4 to 10. So the implication to this is that this indicates a foundational crisis. Many students are unable to acquire basic academic skills that form the building blocks for higher learning. So as a result, graduation does not guarantee competency, especially in public schools. While I'm currently working in a private institution, I've also experienced this low proficiency levels in foundational skills in public schools because I have done my internship in a public school here in the city. So I think there are numerous students who cannot read, for example, although they are already in grade 10, and I think that is a very alarming issue. The second one is that learning poverty here in the Philippines, according here, is that 90.9 of Filipino children aged 10 cannot read and understand age-appropriate text. According to PISA results, reading Filipino students scored an average of 347, far below the OECD average of 476. In terms of mathematics as well, scored 355, well below the OECD average of 489, and in science scored 356, placing the Philippines 80th among all countries. So this is very alarming. So now, in terms of learning losses due to disruptions, so I won't read that anymore. Just one of the example is that in the 2022-2023, DepEd reported over 3,000 class suspensions nationwide due to severe weather conditions and rotating power interruptions, especially in regions, I think it's in region 8 and BARM. So the implication to this is that these losses are compounded for disadvantaged students who lack access to remedial resources like tutorials, internet connection, or home learning support, thereby widening educational inequality. So the next problem is that the underfunding of the education. So I won't read that anymore. I'll go to examples that I can still remember. I think in 2023, the DepEd requested 100 billion to build over 150,000 classrooms nationwide, but only 15 billion was approved. And many rural areas operate on double shift due to lack of classroom and teachers. And not to mention the corruption that is happening in the Department of Education in, Sara's term. So the implication to this is that without adequate investment, the quality of learning environments deteriorates, and leaving many learners in overcrowded classrooms with outdated textbooks and limited access to digital tools. Now, the implication and urgency for reform is that in terms of poor foundational learning, it is now will result to low academic performance. Like when students lack basic skills early on, they struggle to keep up with more complex lessons, leading to lifelong learning gaps. And when there is a low performance, it will eventually result to reduced opportunities for higher education and employment. So, for example, students with weak academic records are often excluded from scholarships, college admissions, or competitive job opportunities. This reinforces social and economic disadvantage. And lastly, the lack of job ready skills will result to stagnant economy and high poverty rates in a macro scale. So a workforce that is unprepared for modern industries limits national productivity, innovation, and economic growth. And it perpetuates the cycle of poverty, most especially right now that there are new skills that the students need to learn, given the emerging or the rise of AI we have right now. So, as we have explored, the Philippine education system stands at a critical crossroads, from its historical foundations to the current reforms under the Matatag curriculum and the persistent signs of an educational crisis. One thing is clear: meaningful, urgent, and systemic change is no longer optional. It is essential. So the data paints a sobering picture. Sadly, millions of students are failing behind, teachers are overburdened, resources are lacking, and the gap between education and employment continues to widen. These challenges are not just institutional, they are deeply personal, affecting the future of every Filipino child, family, and community. Education is the engine for national development. If it stalls, so does progress. If it fails, we fail generation. So the question is not just what must be done. We already know many of the answers. The real mind-boggling question I believe we must ask ourselves is that if we continue to ignore the cracks in our education system today, what kind of citizens and nation are we shaping for tomorrow? That would be all, and thank you once again. This is Sir Shawi, one of the adjudication core of the Philippine Intercollegiate Debate Championship.